be a 2.5-hour hands-on workshop. So putting it into a half hour is what we call an experiment. We'll see how it goes. So I'm Jen Gilbert. I run the tech learning team at Lyft. We are a team for and hiring thing. And a little bit of a sense of where I come from, just how I got here. I've had kind of a strange path, and I think that sort of informs how I think about these problems. So I started out in communications. I have a journalism degree, and I actually spent about 10 years as a manuscript editor. I would have identified as non-technical at the time, but I took up engineering as a second career and was the software engineer at Aruba Networks. I'm sorry you're having trouble. It's probably not my fault. I can't prove it, but and I was the CTO of CookSmarts, which is a small app that is still out there and profitable today, which is always really fun. And I have, as is required in the Bay Area, half of a CS degree. It counts as a whole one in California, I feel. So I decided that I could take my communications background and really apply it to engineering. I saw some shortages in that area. I think communications are always really, especially when it comes to soft skills versus more technical skills. So I started teaching at Dev Bootcamp. I actually see both my former boss and some students and some people I worked with at Dev Bootcamp. So tech learning is a small world. Be nice to people. So what I work on here at Lyft, so my team at Lyft focuses on proprietary tech. I want to set that context just because a lot of what I'm talking about sort of gears toward that, although I do think it'll be useful regardless of what you're trying to teach. And onboarding has been our most urgent priority. So it's not going to be my #1 priority forever, but whenever I was hired on about a year ago, we really need a unified onboarding program that was sort of a holistic experience. So the problem, we'll dig into what I'm trying to solve and how I have been solving it. So at Lyft, and I know this is not unique to Lyft, we were suffering from sort of a workaround philosophy. So what happens is you realize you have a lot of new hires coming in, you're in hypergrowth, and you look at your docs and you say, oh, these are garbage, never mind. We need a different plan. And your plan, which is a good one, I feel, is you say, okay, listen, we will take turns standing by the door. And when new people come in, we'll tell them stuff. It'll be fine. There'll be a rotation. It'll be okay. So you do that for a while. It doesn't really scale. And so tackling how to fix that is the #1 thing that I worry about in my job. So usually how this information is presented is not super effective. So in terms of what this actually looks like, it's usually delivered by slides. That's sort of the default for folks who aren't really sure where to go with it. And there's no real definition of success. I've had conversations with teachers at Lyft and elsewhere where I say, what are you accomplishing? Like, what is your goal of this? What do you want to do with this? They'll say, I don't know. Steve used to teach it, and then he left, and so they asked me to teach it, and now I teach it, and I don't know why I'm here or what I'm doing. And you realize, we need to dig into this just a little bit. In that vein, you can't measure success if you have not defined success. That's just logic. So a lot of times it wasn't being measured either. This is all very normal, by the way. I think this is sort of a growth stage that companies, okay, we need to formalize. There's a heavy presenter burden. I think the most heartbreaking thing about this arrangement is it's way more work than doing it in a more scalable way. Someone has to show up and talk for 60 minutes every Tuesday about the same thing, which isn't a very rewarding experience. And worst of all, you have a passive audience, which is something that I think we intuitively know is not ideal, but it comes up a lot. So I have a test that I apply to presentations and learning experiences whenever I'm assessing them and thinking about how to make them better. You are going to think I'm being sarcastic. I am not. This genuinely helps. I ask myself, if we dropped a curtain and the presenter could not see the audience, to what extent could a potato with googly eyes succeed in this session? By which I mean, would you notice? Would you know that your audience was not there? Would you have any indication? Would they be doing anything? This sounds ridiculous. It actually helps me. If this clarifies anything for you, it's not a binary, it's a percentage, the potato factor. Like 80% of the time you could be a potato, 20% of the time, no way. You're not getting away with that. We know that you're a potato. So the questions that come up, how often must the learner take action? How often are they doing something? Do the learner's actions create output? Are you seeing what they're doing? Selecting what they're doing? Do you have any idea kind of what's going on their side of the fence? Is feedback collected? Is it optional? So is it an expected part of your culture, or is it something that 20 to 30% on average fill out, and then you're kind of missing the rest of those numbers? The thing people miss, I think, because it's kind of insulting to refer to people as potatoes, so I can't blame them, but the thing that they miss is I'm not talking about how the students are doing. I'm talking about how we're doing. I'm talking about how do we know that our session is working. These students are adults, they're not in college anymore, they don't have GPAs. That's not really the point. The point is that they are valuable people, their time is valuable, and we often aren't measuring whether what we're doing is useful for them or what the impact is of that. So potato-friendly learning, it is a problem. It's a problem for a few reasons. I'm going to skip the obvious reasons of it doesn't work very well. I think this community is in an excellent position to understand that already, and it's sort of fighting that. But there's a reason that I don't think people think about as often that I want to talk about, which is that the way we exchange technical knowledge is a diversity issue. So whenever you have a presentation or a learning experience that is not as effective, this is how it gets fixed. It gets fixed in social networks. It gets fixed or it says, oh, hey, sorry, that didn't make any sense. I'm going to clarify for that for you. Great, but not everybody is at the table. You as a company cannot really say that you're doing everything you can for diversity if you're not equipping the people who come in the door. This is why I'm here. I have seen marginalization happen in all levels of tech education. Not that it's intentional, but it happens a lot. And when you measure the quality of what you're doing, it is much easier to say, we are pretty sure we are doing our best. Give everybody the chance to see. In your defense, these potatoes look very attentive sometimes. So the message I usually have for engineers who want to teach is that you would never accept this in your day job, like not for a minute. So whenever we send information to computers, we always make sure we get a response back. We always get that 200. Now you can't tell me that it's easier to send information to humans than it is to computers. Humans have a lot more battling for their attention. They are a lot more complex. They're a lot more distracted. So if you're not okay talking to a computer and being like, it probably got there, you definitely don't want to just kind of send information over the wall and have, just have the assumption like, oh, it's probably fine. So how do we do this? The solution is to teach like an engineer, and we have a design process around this, but I'll walk you through a few examples. There's an asterisk. I do not have it all figured out. My team does not have it all figured out. We've been working on this for about a year, and we've made some headway, and we're still learning pretty much every day how to make this better. So what we've done so far is we've produced 40+ hours of hands-on learning. So this is all proprietary tech, so it's slow for us to spin up, get the hang of it. It's a lot of complexity. So it can be slow going at times, but it's all very project driven. Average quality rating is 4.6 out of 5. Every session has a quality rating. We track metrics for 100% of our students, so we have a pretty good feeling of how people are feeling about the session. I'll dig into what goes into that rating a little bit later. We collect hundreds of data points from each learner. Everyone who goes through our program is continually pushing data to us that we're keeping an eye on for a variety of reasons that I'll dig into a little bit more. And we have minimal overhead facilitator burden. Like, we are not working that hard. A lot of the time, our students are working hard, which is kind of how it should be. So the presenter burden for even a week of onboarding is probably like 2 hours total across smaller increments. So to give you an example of what this can look like in terms of delivering a session, I'll give you our product development drill, just a really quick rundown. So I tell students we are going to build a new feature. We are going to take the humdrum commute that sometimes comes up day after day at Lyft. We're going to spice it up a little with the jungle, thanks to zoo mode. So zoo mode puts a random animal in your Lyft. Always pleasurable. How does it work, you ask? I am happy to tell you. You have a little checkbox if you've been chosen for this particular feature. And if you check it when you request a ride, you will also get a text box asking you for up to 3 animal allergies. You have 4, up to 3 animal allergies, it's fine. And then just like that, you will get a random animal in your Lyft. Sometimes this works out for you. Other times it does not work out for you. But I like to think that the risk is really part of the fun, and I feel like any publicity is good publicity. So it's been going pretty well so far. So I tell them, hey, we're going to implement this feature. What are you going to learn while you're implementing this feature? We're going to go over all these things. I spend a little more time on this part, but stakeholders, product planning flow, the docs that you need, Jira, GitHub, all that stuff that you're going to need. And then I give them a URL and a password, and they get to work in pairs. That's the entire presentation. They work for 2.5 hours after that. I eat bonbons, more or less. So we have worked on scaling education in a way that is both much more engaging, much more data-driven, and much more sustainable for the humans up here who are making these experiences happen week over week. So they log in on this web platform. If you're wondering what this looks like, we actually use Survey Gizmo, which is a marketing tool. I have found that marketing tools are a little more lightweight and flexible than LMSs. Usually you can have a little more conditional logic. There's nothing special about Survey Gizmo. There's lots out there that you could use if you don't prefer this one. But they log in and then they start doing different challenges. So as they're building Zoom mode, for example, they have to consider their stakeholders. They have to go through docs, read those requirements and figure out, okay, we're touching user data. Does that mean we have to loop in the security team, et cetera, et cetera. They fill these things out and we collect all of this data and kind of track how they're doing as they go. So the challenge list, just for reference, they examine some specs, they identify stakeholders, they go to the Jira project. We have a Zoom mode project that is very active every week, and whiteboard the end-to-end development process. So the last page of the workshop collects feedback. So when they're in the platform, the reason we have 100% feedback is it's just baked right into every single experience that we have. So we do collect feedback, and then we email them a list of whatever links they visited during the workshop. So sometimes it's this huge list, sometimes it's a short list, but either way, they can relax. They can just have a good experience. They don't have to bookmark like crazy as they're working their way through. So just to give you a sense of how serious I am about design, because if you want to make a high quality experience, you have to know where you're going. Like, you do not want to make fuzzy letters and then not use them. That is a serious waste of your time. So a little insight, I'm not making this up, this is a real stage of the Zoom mode design. I ended up adding another bird. Sometimes I like to mix it up, but this is how it was storyboarded. And it was a storyboard until it was born. Like, it was a storyboard until 3 days before it went live, because you really want to know where you're headed if you're going to build things. Okay, so how do we do this? What does the build actually look like? So we start with user stories / learner stories. So we actually start with, what should your student be able to do? I'm surprised by how hard this question is, but it really is difficult for people. They'll say, I don't want them to do anything. I just want them to know this. And I'll say, well, why do they need to know this? And sometimes the answer might be they actually don't, which is always a helpful discovery. But a lot of times they really do. It's just the instructors having trouble getting to that reason that it's such important information. Or they'll say, well, they need to know what to do when Lyft is down. And I say, okay, great. So what you want them to be able to do is make the right decision in the moment when Lyft is down. That is a skill. That is something that we can teach. So some examples: the learner can spin up a development server, something that's really common when people are being onboarded. Learner can describe the purpose of X component, explain its relationship to Y component, all of those big architecture diagrams that we all need to understand. Learner can find and query the correct data set. Data is becoming a bigger and bigger issue as we get more and more data that people access to make intelligent business decisions, just to inform their work. You'll notice these are binary. This is like, yes, they can do it, or no, they can't. And that's how we test everything. You can feel the engineering background. I basically have test cases to say, yes, they can, yes, they can. Oh, they had issues with this. Why did they have issues? We will dig in a little bit. So the list gradually becomes an outline for delivery. So we start with this list and we start fleshing it out in a way that I think will be pretty predictable to you. So I'm not going to belabor it too much. But basically, it's like, okay, well, what do we need to give them to equip them to do this? Are we going to deliver this part in slides? Is this part going to be in the platform? What are we going to do? So just kind of a coverage plan before we actually start implementing. This is cheap. So the great thing about designing in text, and the reason I insist that people design in text for so long, is it barely costs you anything. It's so much more expensive to scale up. And I find that a lot of engineers want to build stuff where they're like, oh, we're going to have a staging environment, and we'll have a tool, and we'll have an app. And really, honestly, it's hard to afford that versus the other priorities that you have. So yeah, text is so cheap. Design in text for as long as you can. It costs you nothing, and you can have a wish list for days. You can be like, then a unicorn comes in, and this happens. And you don't even have to worry about how you're going to make it happen. You can worry about that later when you're looking at your budget and your resources and looking for the right tool. So aim for an MVP, minimum viable product. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be meaningful. Students have amazing imaginations. You were born with a rendering engine like no other. Like, all we have to do is tell you, hey, Lyft is down. You have 5 minutes. Here's the countdown clock. And people will physically start sweating. Like, they can imagine it. You don't have to do some fancy thing. A lot of times you can just tell them, this is what's happening. And they will respond to that in good faith most of the time. So I'll put my money where my mouth is on this and show you a comparison between our most elaborate session and one of our simplest sessions. So our most elaborate session is called Worst Ride Ever. It is a simulator experience where every new hire to the company, tech and non-tech, experiences what it's like to be a passenger and what it's like to be a driver. We have a little bit of a presentation in the beginning. We often have little presentations to set context and sort of kick things off. So they start by understanding both sides. We kind of speed through, much obviously slower than that, how all of the steps happen on both sides of the app. And then we tell them that there is a machine in the basement that allows you to simulate rides. Because they are new and nervous, it takes them a long time to realize that we're kidding. Sometimes it's a little bit awkward, but it's always fun. So we tell them, hey, there's a simulator, you're going to use it. And then we point them to, of course, Survey Gizmo, where they complete a simulation. So we tell them, hey, you're the passenger, you want to get somewhere quickly and affordably. Those are the things that you care about. And they can click next, kick off the simulation, and start making decisions. So as they make decisions, their scores pile up. Eventually, we tell them, hey, just kidding, you were the driver, and all the choices you made as a passenger, you inherit as a driver. You probably wish at this point that you had tipped. That's usually what they say whenever they get to this point, but it builds a lot of empathy. I do want to call out, too, there is a clock at the top of that platform. We use that for pretty much everything, and we often have people pairing. So the energy in the room is usually pretty high. People are working through things and pretty motivated. We also have a leaderboard. They love leaderboards. So we always have a winner at the end who managed to do the best in all of these really difficult conditions, as we showed them kind of the edge cases that are the hardest experiences for passengers. I also had to write a scoring module. I'm just really trying to explain to you how complex this was. So we didn't have a good scoring module for it, so I wrote one. So yeah, pretty elaborate. Compared to our least elaborate session called Test Ride, literally a 17-page Google Doc. So complete opposite. So we have kind of all levels of the spectrum. This uses our lab format, which has been really powerful and really low cost. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit in a minute. Test ride is for you to hook up your own copy of Lyft to your phone and take a test ride as both the driver and the passenger are your favorite celebrity. So we boast the only ride where Obama has given a ride to Obama. Like, that doesn't happen very often, but it happens in test ride pretty much every week, actually. So each section is just resource links and challenges. It's as cheap as it gets. It took us a day to write it. We just say, hey, here's 4 links to help you figure this out. Now go spin up a server. Students each get their own copy of the doc, and facilitators use tooling to monitor their progress. So we leave them alone, we let them work, but we know exactly where they are and kind of get the sense that they're getting stuck or struggling so we can reach out. They can drop in throughout the day. So because it's not a heavy presenter burden, because it's not a tap dance at the front of the room, subject matter experts can just come by. We can book them for an hour. They can come meet some people. They can help people debug. And it's a much more natural experience for everyone. And demos occur as needed. So if someone's really getting stuck or we notice there's a common problem, we can sort of work through that. So worst ride ever, what is our tally? 4.78 out of 5 for worst ride ever. Test ride, 4.7 out of 5. Not a huge difference, really. We just had different needs and different design concerns in each of them. One student had the audacity to say, my favorite out of all the onboarding sessions we've done so far, about their Google Doc. Very rude. I'm trying to forgive it. But yeah, test ride, they enjoy it just as much. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be what they want to work on, and they just have to feel empowered. Separate your concerns. This is a big one. So the workaround philosophy, we remember this, right? So we said, oh, forget it. We'll just stand by the door. We'll tell them how things work. We got rid of that model because presenters get tired. Information gets siloed. So now it lives in your slides because you saw these docs that said, oh, this is a mess. Let's summarize this in slides that will also get old. Doesn't work out really well after a little while. So the curriculum gets old on both sides. And now you have 2 sources of information that you can't keep up with, which can get really stressful. So instead we do the work with what you've got philosophy. And that can be rough for a while because you're improving your informational infrastructure. But the lesson is an agent. It's not a source of information. So we're connecting people to our existing resources. We are not of ourselves a resource except as sort of a path to sort of shine a light on what people should be looking at. Learning is mostly active and project-based, and facilitators connect instead of performing, as we mentioned. So this becomes a relationship. We have started to have ecosystems where new hires are making PRs, people are making things better, and we kind of get that ball rolling where we become good citizens. We're actually improving the overall health of the company instead of acting as sort of a Band-Aid on top of this issue where we can't manage our institutional knowledge very well. So instead of thinking of it as performing, we kind of get away from that and we say we are actually the spotlight operator, and our only job is to direct you to our existing resources so you can benefit from them. And so an ideal case, for example, an intro establishes why the topic is important, connects students to someone who can help them. An ongoing narrative guides the exploration. So there's some story. It doesn't have to be a fancy story. We're building a feature, or let's test a change using our environment, which is a really common case. The curriculum asks evergreen questions or assigns an evergreen task. Now, evergreen is tricky, right? You can't quite get there, but we find we actually don't have to update our curriculum often at all. And it's because we say things like, spin up a cloud server to use for this test. The way you do that could change 100 times, and it does not affect us at all. Our job is to connect you to the team whose job it is to tell you how to spin up a cloud server. Our job is not to own that information because it doesn't scale, and we can't do that. For each question or question set, the student is equipped with resources, as mentioned. So here's a link to the docs, easy enough. A facilitator holds students accountable and helps them when they get stuck. So I'll show you what this looks like when we dig into the labs a little bit. And students can help update those resources. So write tests and monitor everything you ship. Again, we still want to be good engineers here. So verify each skill in your learner stories checklist. This is hard, and we'll talk about like good user questions, but nobody wants to take a multiple choice test. Nobody wants to verify in this sort of assessment way. You have to be kind of creative when you gather that data. And monitor the progress of every student. This is what's interesting, is we actually watched this happen live, and it has changed the way we do things. I actually developed this at Stripe when I taught their internal coding class. I realized that I could see very clearly if I found ways to make a seismograph of comprehension where the wheels fell off. It's like, oh, I completely failed you. Like, there's no way you can move on from this. I'm glad I knew that. I'm glad I'm watching kind of you progress through the challenge. So we often deliver in person, but with async friendly platforms. So everything you've seen so far, we have an online component and we have an in-person component. You can take either one. The online component just has videos instead of that experience of having the sort of intro. So that way people get the experience they need, but then we're only maintaining one curriculum, which is really nice. So Mentimeter, this is my first demo. You can participate. I realize that you don't have the internet necessarily, but you can use your phone, thankfully. So this is the first interactive tool I wanted to show you really quickly, and we're going to settle an age-old question. If you go to menti.com and type in this code, you can vote. I'm going to give you like a minute just for the sake of time. I have a theory about how this is going to go, but I'll let you decide. Neck and neck already. Kitten people, where are you? Where are my kittens? I had high hopes for this group, but puppies win every time. Kittens have never won, even once. I thought you were my people, but I was wrong. Yeah, so you can vote. And you can see here you have the count of who is participating. That way I know when the whole class is checked in, which is actually pretty important if I expect every single human to do this, which I do. And I will hold this until it gets done if I know I have 25 people in the room. So other question types, because I actually am not a big fan of multiple choice most of the time. Whoops. I asked the least engaging question possible because we're under a time crunch. So if you want to answer, you can see what this looks like. But basically, when you answer, your answer will pop up on the screen. This is great for discussions when normally only overrepresented groups would raise their hand. I find that the same 5 people raise their hand, and it's not because they're bad people, it's because they feel like they own the room. And a lot of times you can't fight that, even if it's 80% underrepresented groups. It's still very powerful. So we developed a policy at Stripe that everybody talks every time. And their name's not on it. It's a pretty safe way to communicate. And then they also see, oh, I'm not the only person who got it wrong, because they're never the only person who got it wrong. So it fights imposter syndrome pretty effectively. And last but not least, you can also just ask people to react, and you can control what the reactions are. So sometimes I just say, oh, hey, thumbs up if you got it, like thumbs down if you're concerned. I just want to get a real quick temperature check. And you can also react with a cat if you want to. I don't know what it means. I think it means you're curious, I guess. Interpretation I'm going to take. That's Mentimeter. We use this for live interaction. We're checking in every 5 to 10 minutes to see how you're doing. We use this most heavily for data querying. We give people data query challenges, and then we check in with them to see how that's going for them. Also, someone is usually pretty easily amused, and then there's just like a flow for a while of rainbow reactions, which is totally fine. So we'll save the Survey Gizmo demo for the very end. I'm not actually going to demo it live. I'm going to just show you a link and a password. You can take a picture, and then you can play around with it to your heart's content pretty much all day. I just gave an example lesson. Kind of work through if you like. So the lab, this is the weird, interesting success story of tech onboarding. You can make a Google Doc, and you can make a Google Doc with these little weird language things here, like, hey, I want a checkbox, I want a text box, whatever. You can enter it into our compiler. We will compile it for you. And what comes out on the other end is an interactive Google Doc. So the student gets this and they fill it in, and you can actually monitor it live in a monitoring tool that we have. And what people really like about this is they can work at their own pace, they can take breaks, but they know you can see them and not in a creepy way. They often say, I just felt really supported. Every time I finished a section, I got the thumbs up from you, and I'm like, wow, okay, I'm doing great, but I could do it at my own pace and in my own world, and I didn't have to interrupt you. So they have access to the instructor without really feeling like a burden at all. So at the very bottom, they can check in on a section, they drop the mic, we have cute emoji at Lyft. So they can drop the mic to say, hey, I'm ready for feedback, and then the instructor leaves feedback, and the student can respond if they like. So that's a two-way conversation. On the monitoring side, this is what it looks like. It is not fancy, but we wrote it in about 3 days, and it's been one of the most powerful things we've ever done. So sometimes it's, the hacky stuff that gets you by. So you can monitor it here. You can approve people's answers. Again, we just have what's your middle name, what's your favorite color. And if they have not made progress in a while, that will turn red, which tells me maybe they're struggling. So sometimes I check because people don't want to admit that they don't know something, especially when they're new. The other nice thing is if they are awaiting approval, that will light up yellow. It's very easy for me to see who's waiting for an answer from me. So I can monitor 30 students pretty easily in a pretty interactive way without breaking a sweat, which was a lot harder to do before we had this tool. Yeah, there's the conversation. We can leave little comments. We can answer back and forth. We can have this relationship if we want to. Students love labs. It's been a huge success. People keep saying, can this be a lab about everything? So we may need to convert a few more to that. I think they just really like the independence combined with the accountability and the support. Okay, measure success. This is a big one, right? This is really why I'm here. You're assessing your workshop, not the student. Remember that. It frees you from so many things. It frees you from the stress of having to grade every single person. So students get sanity checks on their answers. If they're saying something dangerous, obviously we want to correct that. But a lot of times, if you see a good faith effort and they're pretty much on track, you're like, cool, you're looking at the stuff you need to look at, you're working on it, you're making it happen. You're either going to get there or you're not in terms of a pull request. So, if you can't get there, we'll find out and we'll help you and it'll be fine. So we don't really have to grade that way. Workshops get much more intense scrutiny. So we will look in aggregate at all the data. Where are people struggling? What's taking them the longest? What are their timestamps? Why does this take 35 minutes every time? Like, how do we make that faster for them? You can collect much richer data this way because you're under no obligation to collect data that makes a pie chart really easily. So we will sometimes ask, what do you think in this stock will be most relevant for your role? And we actually learn from them, which can be really powerful. So you can ask very flexible, personalized questions without hurting anything because you're considering it anecdotally. So think of students as integration tests to strengthen your company's resources. I tell them this, they laugh every time, but it's true. They have the gift of having no idea how Lyft does things, and it's really powerful to watch them work through these processes. And we don't try to save them from our docs. We expose them to our docs, and they improve our docs, and that way things get better. So what are they getting wrong? What's slowing them down? And finally, the experience. So was this effective, which students can't answer very well. I find they're not calibrated, especially as new hires. They're just like, yeah, that was great. I feel smarter, but they don't really know if it's going to be powerful in the job or not. So what we're asking students for is how did it feel? Because if it didn't feel good, they're not going to come back or they're not going to be engaged next time. So we collect feedback from all of our participants and we give them 2 statements to agree with to like a 5-star extent. 1, this experience was engaging. 2, I feel more equipped for my work at Lyft. Because eventually that's what this is about. I was engaged and I feel empowered. Those are the 2 things that we want our students to experience. Last but not least, we just say, explain these ratings. It's just an open prompt. That way they can tell us why they gave us a 3 on something if something was bothering them. And we often find issues with the curriculum. Number 6, deploy fixes and release upgrades. So I'll tell you a hotfix story and an upgrade story. Pain points can arise very suddenly when everyone's working on something. 30 people in a room working on something. Some change gets pushed that breaks the way we were doing things. Lyft's internal directory allows badging. So I will stand up when the situation gets intense enough and I will offer them our coveted documentation wizard badge to the first person who volunteers to fix the issue for the 40 people behind them to where we can get this fixed pretty quickly. And it usually works. They're pretty motivated by that. The upgrade story, we asked the question, how do you request a code review? Number 1 answer was the correct command. Great. The number 2 answer was a very dangerous command that we definitely did not want people to run. So it was the command to actually skip checks in an emergency and push code. Opposite of what you were looking to do. They're not similar. We don't know why it happened. We still don't know why it happened, but we tweaked docs until that answer went away. So we just watched the feed, we kept adjusting, and it went away. So we fine-tuned our level of risk. We're still working on this, but avoid monoliths and single points of failure. You've made it when you realize you're a monolith and that's a problem, right? That's like a stage that you go through. So we have recently nominated reps for each area. So data, server, kind of all those different areas of tech. They are the tech learning committee. We work directly with them to triage and produce topics. Each topic gets assigned a curriculum developer, subject matter experts, and a facilitator rotation. We do not produce the topic until this happens. We found that otherwise topics just don't get off the ground. And finally, put learner experience first. So in all this mess of these requirements and these boxes that you're checking, these coverage standards, it's really easy to just forget to consider the whole thing and realize you made something that is not fun at all, or just isn't a good experience. So ask interesting questions. They don't like to parrot documentation. They don't like multiple choice. They like to make a decision where you say, hey, Lyft is down, what do you do? They're really excited to answer that question. Relate a source to their own role. Say, what does this mean to you in your role? Find issues. We'll send them sample feedback, sample postmortems, sample whatever, and ask them, what happened here? What's wrong? Look at this dashboard. What do you see happening? What incident is it? Use tooling. They like to use data tooling. They like to use just the actual tools they're going to be using. Seems common sense enough. And build stuff. They're never going to go wrong with building stuff. Review war stories. They love war stories. We show them postmortems. They like to dig into them, discuss those in groups. Or analyze complex output. So again, just show them this whole realm of overwhelming output and say, what's going on here? And they really like to dig into that quite a bit. So an example, studying our data architecture diagram overwhelmed students. It just wasn't a good experience. We realized they needed a more engaging task. So they now pair up and draw it themselves. We give them this huge text description and they dig in and there's a clock counting down as they work on it. Bonus, the original diagram was hard to maintain anyway. So often the scalable solution is scalable for us too, which is great. Feedback, they loved it. It's like the #1 thing that they mention. There you go. They like to draw apparently. I like the drawing. There should be more drawing. That is solid advice. So the last thing is just to keep innovating. I feel like I have conversations where we forget that these are not college students. These are not high school students. We have a lot of technology at our disposal that a lot of people don't have. We're in a unique position to find creative solutions that have not occurred to us yet. I still believe that that is very possible, and I think sometimes we forget that just because education exists in so many other incarnations that aren't. So remember your advantages, use them. You can scale with that a lot more effectively than how people are already doing. That's it. This is the full list, and here's the demo if you want to snap a picture and play with it later. That's all I have. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions. Maybe like 2, because I'm a little over. Sorry.